good evening, and welcome to a new true crime video. If you are not yet subscribed to my channel, press the little button and select the bell so that you don't miss any upcoming stories. Tonight I am going to be telling you the story of Michaela Garecht. She lived in Hayward, and she was 9 years old on the 19th of November 1988. It was just before Thanksgiving holidays, and she was playing with her best friend, Katrina, who lived across the street. The two of them asked their mothers if they could go to the grocery store on their own. And for the first time, the mothers agreed. And the girls were really excited, and they felt like grown-ups. Katrina took her scooter, and her brother lent his to Michaela. They both went to the store, which was just 2 blocks down the road. They went to the Rainbow Market. They bought some candy and some soda and some little snacks. They came out and they were so excited. They started walking back, forgetting they had their scooters. So they turned around and went back to the shop to get them. When they arrived, one of the scooters was missing. They had a quick look round, and Michaela saw the scooter, which had been moved a bit further down the parking lot next to a car. So she went to get it. Katrina was bending down, getting hold of her own scooter, when she heard a big scream. When she looked up, she saw her best friend being grabbed by a man and forced into his car. The man drove off as fast as possible. Katrina went back to the store and she told the employees what had happened, and they immediately called the police. Katrina had given the description of this man, but the shop assistant that spoke to the police got confused, and she described another man she had seen. So she told the police that the man had a moustache and drove a burgundy-colored car. And that's the information that first was brought out during those very first precious hours. Investigators were certain that the scooter had been moved purposely by the man who took Michaela, and they took the prints that were on the handlebar and the fork of the scooter. A reward fund of $70,000 was posted at this time for anyone who could provide information on Michaela's whereabouts. At the time of the kidnapping, Michaela's photo was featured on milk cartons and billboards throughout the country. By the evening, Katrina had been interviewed by the police, and she gave the description that she had seen with her own eyes. The man was about 6 feet tall, slender, had blue eyes, dirty blonde hair, shoulder length, was a bit hippie-like, and had very severe acne. He drove a run-down beige car that had a dent on the front bumper. The car seemed to be very run down, as it didn't start the first time he tried it. By Sunday evening, 50,000 missing child flyers had been distributed around the area by family, friends, and people from missing child organizations. The police started a hunt in the bay, and FBI was setting up a nationwide search. 200 calls a day flood the Hayward police station. People from all parts of the state were calling in. Many of them were people calling to ask questions and who seemed unrelated to the case. The case attracted national attention, and over 5,000 leads were sent in over the very first year. They set up aerial searches with planes and helicopters. Scrapyards and mechanic shops were searched in the hope of finding the suspect's run-down car. All potential witnesses were interviewed. Police spoke to the neighbors, family, children of the neighbors, relatives, store employees. Every single registered sex offender of the area was interviewed. 1 month later, the police were still no closer to finding out who was responsible and what had happened the day Michaela vanished. During the same period, parents in the East Bay began reporting their daughters were sent some strange letters, birthday cards, small gifts, and money. All these letters came from the same man, and this man was Timothy Binder. When asked why he had contacted all these girls, Binder told investigators that he was just being kind to girls he felt were lonely. Tim approached many of the mothers of missing girls from the East Bay area. He had also approached Michaela's mother with a map showing where he thought she could be. When investigators researched information on Timothy, they found that he had been fired in 1985, working at Social Security. His boss had caught him collecting the names, the addresses, and birth dates of young girls in Colorado. He'd sent nearly 40 girls $50 each on their 14th birthday. When questioned, Timothy said he was mimicking a TV show in which a man surprised strangers with money, saying he thought it was a touch of magic for the kids. Parents complained and Tim was fired. He drove a blue van with a personalized license plate reading "Love You." The inside of the van was covered with pictures of children, mainly young girls, Bible verse quotes, and crayon drawings. Parents of missing girls reported that Tim called or visited them to offer help in locating their child. Tim downplayed the involvement and described himself as a good Samaritan. However, families and law enforcement said that Tim appeared to be playing mind games with them. 5 months before the disappearing of Michaela, on June the 3rd, 1988, Amber Swartz Garcia, 7 years old, disappeared while playing jump rope in a front yard. A few days later, Tim visited Amber's mother, saying he had been looking for Amber in the forest and would love to bring her back to her mother. But he referred to the search as looking for a dead body. He said the case reminded him of what had happened to Angela Bouguet 5 years earlier. He had actually written a letter to Angela's mother one day before the disappearance of Amber. But what he did not tell Amber's mother is how obsessed he was with Angela. Angela Bouguet, 5 years old, was found sexually assaulted and strangled to death in 1983. That was 5 years earlier in North California. Her body was found a week later, buried in a shallow grave not far from her home. Her murder was unsolved. Tim repeatedly visited her grave, often in the middle of the night. He was said to have gone there more than 90 times within the first year. He spent time talking to her and was known to clean and decorate her grave. In an interview with a forensic psychologist, Tim said that he liked that Angela's photo was on her gravestone. "I fell in love with her," he said. "You're not supposed to be in love with a dead girl." Investigators never considered Tim a suspect in her murder. Angela's mother's ex-boyfriend was found guilty using DNA evidence. However, some investigators believe that Angela's abduction and murder could have triggered Timothy. At one point, Timothy had invited a reporter for the San Jose Mercury News to interview him. He set the time and place of the interview, which had to be made at 4:30 a.m. at Oakmont Cemetery, where Angela was buried. During the interview, he asked to play his favorite song for her, Jesus Here's Another Child to Hold. He said he thought of the missing girls as his own children. Timothy was interviewed after the disappearance of Amber, and he denied any implication. He instead offered police his thought about how he thought Amber might have been kidnapped and how she must have reacted when abducted. He said that he thought that the next girl who would disappear would be between 9 and 10 years old. 9-year-old Michaela Garecht disappeared shortly after. Timothy, who lived in Oakland, was in Hayward on the morning that Michaela went missing. He had undergone an exam to be a fireman, and he had failed. In May 1991, the parents of a 12-year-old girl handed to police a very strange letter that had been sent to their daughter. It was written backwards and had to be read in a mirror. Another letter was received containing a love poem and Bible verses with certain words underlined. I have chosen you. Be with me where I am. And they were all sent by Timothy Bindner. 3 years later, Bindner sent an FBI profiler a Christmas card with an image of a little girl holding up 4 fingers to indicate her age. Amanda Nikki Campbell, 4 years old, disappeared soon after, on December the 27th, 1991. This was 3 years after Michaela went missing. On December the 27th, 1991, Amanda Nicole Campbell from Fairfield, who went by the name of Nikki. She was 4 years old and was playing in her front yard with her brother and a friend. At 4:30 p.m., she rode her bike to another friend's house around the corner, just 8 doors away from her home. She never arrived, and she was never found. Her bicycle was later found abandoned a few blocks away from her home later that evening. Authorities believed she was pulled into a car, but she has never been located and no one has been charged in her disappearance. This sounded like a very similar case and was just a couple of miles away from Michaela's. Timothy was considered a suspect in both Nikki and Michaela's disappearances. He was later arrested in 1992, a few weeks after Nikki's disappearance, for trying to lure two 12-year-old girls into his van. But the charges were later dropped. It was the first and only time Binder was arrested. His home was searched by police in late 1992, but no evidence connecting him to the kidnappings was found, and Tim could not be charged. He gave interviews to the press, reading out strange poems about children's deaths. After Nikki's disappearance, the rush of murders and kidnappings of young girls in the Bay Area came to an end. Timothy was never charged in any of the cases. He maintained his innocence, and in 1996, a man was arrested for the murder of Angela. It was Larry Graham, a long-time suspect in the case. Timothy successfully sued Nikki's hometown of Fairfield Police Department in 1997 for defamation of character, with a settlement of $90,000. The Garecht family was haunted by the disappearance for years, eventually resulting in the separation of Michaela's parents after 15 years of marriage. The event had led to too many conflicts in their relationship. The missing girl's mother never gave up hope of her child returning to her. She maintained a blog where she published news reports, updates, and messages to Michaela. She tied yellow ribbons around a tree near the scene of the abduction to keep the case in the minds of the public. In December 1992, 4 years after the abduction, there was finally a new lead. A prison inmate in Indiana named Roger Haggard said he knew who had killed Michaela Garecht, and he said he knew where her body was. While hiding from authorities in Hayward in late 1988, he said he had met a guy called Slam Davidson who had said he was responsible for the crime. They were both drug addicts and had been smoking crack cocaine that night. They had met in a bar in Hayward. By the end of the night, Roger claimed that Davidson showed him the body of a young girl wrapped in a blanket. He saw one arm hanging out of it, part of her face, and her chest, which had been stabbed. Davidson led him out to a field towards the area of San Francisco, and he watched Davidson bury the girl's body. This Roger Haggard was serving out an 11-year sentence for various crimes, including charges of burglary and theft. Although investigators didn't trust this man and had their doubts about his story, they were urged by Michaela's family to further look into it. So they brought this man over to California to point out the location of the field and lead the police to the body. They drove around for hours and they dug up many areas, but Roger didn't seem to find where it was. After hours of search, he admitted it was all fake and that he had made up the story. When they asked him why he had done that, he answered that it was to give peace of mind to the family. He was sent back to jail and 6.5 years were added to his sentence. No solid information had come up for 6 years after the disappearance. 15,000 leads had been investigated with no breakthrough. August 2009. A kidnapped girl named J.C. Lee Dugard reappeared after 18 years in captivity. She had been kidnapped by Philip and Nancy Garecht, who were arrested and who pleaded guilty. JC was 11 years old when she also had been snatched and thrown into a car in broad daylight in the presence of a witness, just an hour's drive away from Hayward. The car used in the kidnapping was also very similar to the one used to take Michaela. Michaela was kidnapped just 3 months after Philip Garecht was freed from prison. He had spent 11 years in prison for the rape and kidnapping of a woman in 1976. Hayward police conducted an extensive search of the Garecht's house and backyard for possible clues that could be linked to Michaela's disappearance. A few days later, investigators found bone fragments in Garecht's garden. They sent them to the lab to be analyzed. Unfortunately, they were not able to determine whether they were animal or human bones. But another piece of bone was found. It was tested and said that it may be human, but the police mentioned that it was not unusual in the area to find some very old bones belonging to Native American Indians and the bone would have to be dated. The arrest of Garrido and the search of his property was reported by the media, and when Katrina saw the car, she immediately recognized it. Michaela's family began to renew their hope that the kidnapping would be solved and that Michaela could even be possibly alive. They were once again devastated when nothing came out of this case that could prove to be related to Michaela's kidnapping. JC was questioned and was said to have no information. Investigators were able to interview Garrido and his wife, Nancy, and they were allegedly satisfied that neither suspect was involved. August 2012. One of the speed freak killers, Wesley Shermantine, who is now on death row, wrote a letter to the newspapers pointing out that his partner in crime, Lauren Herzog, had a strong resemblance with the portrait of the person who had kidnapped Michaela. Herzog had been paroled and released from prison in 2010 and had committed suicide in January 2012. He did so shortly after a bounty hunter informed him that Shermantine was planning to disclose the location of a well and two other locations where the duo buried their victims. Until then, none of the victims' bodies had been found. Both men maintained that the other did the killing in all cases. These two serial killers had been arrested in 2000 and convicted of murdering several females in the 80s and in the 90s. Authorities believed Shermantine and Herzog had as many as 15 victims. When asked about this resemblance between Herzog and the man who took Michaela, Katrina commented saying, "I thought then, and I think now, he could be the kidnapper. I think there are features that look very much like the man, and it seems like a strong lead." In February 2012, the bounty hunter offered Shermantine $30,000 for some information. Shermantine drew a map and gave additional information which led authorities to an old well. It was 1.5 hours drive away, west from Hayward. More than 1,000 human bone fragments were recovered. The bones were to be tested by the California Department of Justice for DNA profiling, and they were found to belong to 5 different individuals, some of which were believed to be potentially belonging to Michaela. However, DNA analysis completed later that year excluded her as a possibility. Shermantine said that in the future he may reveal the location of more remains. It is suspected that the speed freak killers murdered at least 19 people. There is some speculation that the true body count could be of 72 or even higher. 30 years had gone by without this case being solved. In December 2020, suspected serial killer David Emery Mish, 51, was charged with Michaela's abduction and murder. He was already serving a prison sentence for the 1989 murder of Margaret Ball, 36, of Hayward, and is facing charges for the double killing of 2 other women, Michelle Xavier, 18, and Jennifer Dewey, 20, in Fremont in 1986. Authorities were able to match a partial palm print on her scooter back to him. 2 eyewitnesses to the kidnapping picked him out of a photo lineup. Mish is awaiting trial for Michaela's murder and in the 1986 double murder. If convicted in either case, he will be eligible for death penalty.